Mara kicked open the burning door with one boot and staggered into the clearing, her skirt smoking, her rifle clutched in one hand and her dead husband's ring in the other, the barn collapsing behind her in a thunder of flame and ash. The settlers who'd come with torches and lies were already gone, their tracks still hot in the dirt, laughter echoing like ghosts through the trees. Witch, they'd called her. Outlaw whore. Said the land was cursed by her name, that no woman could live alone without debt or devil in her pocket. She'd tried silence, tried mercy. Now all that stood behind her was smoke and memory. The chickens were gone, livestock dead or scattered, the well poisoned with lie. She knelt in the dirt and scooped up a handful of soil, rubbing it between her fingers like she used to do before planting, back when the world was slower. "That's enough," she muttered. "No more running." From a leather pouch buried beneath the root cellar, she pulled the box she'd sworn never to open again. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a six-shooter etched with black roses and a silver star pinned beside it. Worn, blood-stained, forgotten. They thought they'd burned a widow. They didn't know they'd awakened someone else. She tied her hair back, stripped the soot from her face, and slid the revolver into the old holster like it had never left her hip. By dusk, she was on horseback, her saddle creaking beneath her like an old friend trying to remember how to ride. The town wasn't far, just west of Elm Ridge, past the river where folks swore ghosts lived. She didn't care anymore. Let the dead whisper. She had names in her mouth now, and none of them were forgiveness. At the crossroads, an old man in a rocking chair squinted as she rode by, pipe dangling from his lips. "Ain't seen you in 10 years, he muttered. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." She didn't slow. "You still drink at the sheriff's poker table?" He nodded. "Every Thursday." "Then listen close next one," she said. "By then, I'll have given him a reason to remember who I am." The horse picked up speed, the wind catching her coat like wings. Behind her, the ridge still smoked. Ahead, justice waited like a bullet notched in prayer. "You sure that's her?" the barkeep whispered, as Mara stepped into the saloon, her coat dusted with ash, her eyes darker than dusk, her hand never far from the grip of her old iron. The piano player froze mid-note, and a gambler coughed into his drink like he'd seen a ghost walk through the door. Sheriff Amos Dunn sat at the corner table, silver badge dull, mouth twisted into a grin he hadn't earned. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, pushing back his chair. "Mara Ashwood crawled out of hell or just passing through?" She met his gaze without blinking. "I came to collect names, not pleasantries." The room went still, the kind of quiet that only came when death stepped close. Amos tilted his head. "Now why'd a legend like you stir up our little patch of peace?" "You let them burn my land," she said, voice like a lit fuse. "You watched." Amos chuckled. "You mean that homestead you built on disputed territory? Far as I heard, you weren't using your name proper anyway. Wasn't it Blackthorn they used to call you?" The name hit like a hammer. Blackthorn, the outlaw who rode with Eli Kane, the woman with 20 bodies to her name and a bounty no one dared chase. Mara didn't deny it. "They earned what they got, just like you're about to." Amos stood slowly, resting a hand on his belt near his revolver. "Ain't no court left for folks like you." "Good," she said, stepping forward. "Then no jury to stop what comes next." The moment cracked like glass. Amos drew, but Mara was faster, her revolver flashing silver in the lamplight. His gun clattered to the floor before he could fire, his wrist dripping red. "Next shot don't miss," she said. "Tell me who rode east with torches. I want names." Amos gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his brow. "Jeb Holloway, the preacher's boy, Morgan Wilkes, Seth Carter, and Tom Briggs." Mara nodded once. Then they get what they asked for. She holstered her gun and turned to the stunned saloon. If anyone else thinks a woman don't deserve soil under her feet, speak now. No one moved. No one dared. Mara stepped back into the dust, 5 names etched into her mind like the weight of loaded chambers. And the town knew. The devil wasn't dead. She just wanted peace. And they denied her that. Mara rode east before the sun could climb, the names burning hotter than the desert air as she followed the trail of ash and cowardice through dry creek beds and broken fence lines, her revolver balanced on her thigh like a trusted lie. She didn't ride fast. Vengeance, like fire, didn't need to rush. It only needed to burn long enough to be remembered. By midday, she found the first one. Jeb Holloway, drunk on a porch, bottle dangling from his fingers, boots kicked up like the world owed him sleep. He didn't recognize her at first, just squinted through the glare and waved lazily. "Ain't seen a woman out here since we sent that witch runnin'," he mumbled. "You got business?" She didn't answer, just stepped off her horse and walked up the porch, each step measured, slow, final. When her shadow fell across his chest, he looked up and froze. "No," he breathed, scrambling to stand. You're supposed to be buried?" she asked. "Forgotten?" She drew, the click of her hammer louder than thunder. "I tried that life." Jeb fell to his knees, hands raised. "It weren't personal. They said you had spells, curses, that you'd cursed the water." "Water don't burn barns," she said coldly. "Men do." He wept then. Honest or not, it didn't matter. She fired into the dirt beside his boot. "You run, west, and you tell the others what's coming." "You won't shoot me?" he whispered. "No," she said, "but I'll shoot the next one I find sittin' easy." Jeb stumbled away, still shaking, leaving his whiskey behind like it no longer numbed what needed killing. Mara mounted again, eyes scanning the horizon. One name crossed off, not with blood, but with warning. 4 remained. She reached the crossroads by dusk, where a preacher's church leaned sideways with neglect. There, Morgan Wilkes sat on the steps, rifle across his lap, as if waiting for a ghost to come claim him. "You here to confess?" Mara asked. He didn't flinch. "I figured you'd find us." "Then you know what comes next." He nodded slowly. "But I won't run." She stepped closer, revolver steady. "Then stand tall, 'cause this is judgment." The sky bled orange as the shot rang out. She buried him in silence beneath a dead oak. No prayer, no cross, only the dirt, and the truth it would never forget. The sheriff's warning reached the next name before she did, and by the time Mara reached the Carter homestead, the gate was barred, the windows shuttered, and Seth Carter's mother stood on the porch like a statue carved from grit and denial. "He ain't here," she said without blinking. "And even if he was, I wouldn't hand him over to no outlaw." Mara dismounted slowly, her boots crunching dry soil as she eyed the house, calculating. "You raised a boy who lights fire under widows and calls it justice. That make you proud?" "I raised a boy who believes in order," the woman snapped. "And you, Blackthorn, you bring chaos wherever you ride." "I bring reckoning," Mara said, her voice like flint striking steel. "And I don't much care for sermons." A rifle barrel glinted from the upstairs window, aimed square at her head. Mara didn't move. "That you, Seth?" she called. "Hiding behind curtains while your mama does your talking?" No answer, just a shift of movement. "You murdered livestock," she continued. "Poisoned my well, burned my land. You lit a match, boy, and you thought no one would come walking through the smoke." A moment passed, then 2. The door creaked. Seth stepped out, rifle still in hand but pointed low, guilt carved across his face like scars. "You gonna shoot me out here?" he asked. "With my ma watching?" She's the one who should have taught you better, Mara said. But no, I ain't shooting today. She pulled a slip of paper from her coat and tossed it at his feet. A list, 5 names, 2 crossed. You're the 3rd. You got 1 night to disappear. Not west, not south. Gone. And if I don't? Then I don't stop next time, she said flatly. I ain't here to play sheriff. I'm here to even the ledger. He looked down at the paper, then back at her, jaw tight. You were a legend once. Now you're just mean. Legends get carved in wood, she said. Mean women stay alive. With that, she turned and rode away, leaving dust in her wake and a name with one last breath of mercy. She didn't look back. The storm didn't pause to see who ran. It only checked who had it coming. And the town? It stayed quiet, not out of peace, but fear that Mara Blackthorne had only just begun. By the time Mara reached the edge of the Briggs cattle lands, the sky had turned to steel, heavy with storm, and her coat whipped behind her like smoke that refused to settle. Tom Briggs wasn't hiding. He stood by the corral, hands on his belt, eyes shaded beneath a wide hat, as if daring her to finish what everyone said she would. Heard you been carving your way through Elm Ridge, he called, his voice thick with grit. Didn't figure you'd leave me for last. Mara slid from her saddle, her fingers brushing the handle of her revolver like it was a heartbeat. You burned my land, she said. Watched my husband die coughing blood because you fouled the well. And now you're going to talk to me about order? Tom didn't move. It wasn't supposed to go that far. You were supposed to scare. Leave. That's what they said you'd do. They forgot who I was, she said. And you believed them. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. If you came to kill me, then do it. But don't pretend this is justice. You rode with Eli Kane. You left more than your share of graves in the dirt. Her jaw clenched, but her hands didn't twitch. I buried Eli, she said. Watched him rot from the inside because he thought fear was better than truth. I left that name behind. You brought it back. The thunder cracked overhead, echoing through the hills. You got any last words? She asked. Briggs stared at her, unflinching. I got cattle, a family inside, and a rifle close enough to matter. But if you think killing me brings you peace, you ain't found it yet. For a breath, neither moved. Then Mara holstered her gun. You're right, she said. This ain't peace. It's a ledger, and you're the last name on it. She reached into her coat and tossed a bullet at his feet, the casing carved with the Blackthorn mark she once rode under. Next time I ain't bringing paper, just fire. She turned without waiting, mounted, and rode into the rising wind. Behind her, Briggs stood frozen, staring at the mark like it had come back to haunt him. And in that moment, everyone in Elm Ridge learned. Mara Blackthorne wasn't a ghost. She was the storm coming home. The storm broke that night over Elm Ridge, wind howling like the dead had been stirred, and lightning split the sky as Mara rode through the main street, coat drenched, hat pulled low, her horse slick with rain and purpose. Windows shuttered, doors locked, even the dogs tucked their tails beneath porch steps. The townsfolk had seen enough. 4 names crossed, 1 warned, and the devil they'd thought they could bury now carving silence into every heartbeat. At the saloon, the piano man packed up early. At the church, the preacher's wife lit candles without prayer. And in the sheriff's office, Amos Dunn poured himself another glass with hands that trembled despite the iron still strapped to his hip. Mara stepped through the door like thunder given form, water pooling at her boots, revolver dry and ready. Amos didn't stand. He only looked up, eyes bloodshot. You ain't killed a single one of 'em here, he said. Not inside our walls. You kept your war out there. I kept it where you let it start, she replied. But your hands were never clean. He laughed, bitter and hollow. I never burned a damn thing. No, she said. You just looked away while they did. She stepped closer, dropped a badge on the desk. The silver warped, the name on it scratched out. I'm not here for blood, not yours. Not unless you raise a hand. Then why come? He asked. To finish your list. To give you one, she said, sliding another slip across the desk. It held no names, only a warning. Next time someone lights a fire, you better be the one putting it out. Amos stared at the page, throat working. And if I'm not? She turned to leave, voice quiet but sharp. Then Elm Ridge gets reminded what kind of legend I used to be. She rode out as the thunder rolled, the town behind her holding its breath. She didn't stop at the ridge, didn't look back at the ashes they'd left her. Instead, she rode toward the hills, where the air smelled of pine and memory, and no one knew her name. She wasn't riding to disappear. She was riding to live. Because Mara Blackthorn wasn't the outlaw anymore. She was the reckoning that learned how to walk away. And that, in the end, was the part they'd never see coming. The cabin stood half sunken into the hills, moss growing thick along its roof, and birds nesting in the eaves where no bullets had ever flown. Mara tied her horse beneath the pines and walked the path slow, her boots quiet in the mud, her fingers twitching not from fear, but from habit. It had been years since she'd seen this place, her mother's retreat, the one she used to call Hollow Mercy. No one ever found it. No one dared. Inside, dust cloaked the shelves, and silence greeted her like a sister too long parted. She set her gun on the table, not out of need, but as a symbol. This was a space where vengeance did not belong. The fire took time to coax from damp logs, but when it finally caught, it warmed the cold that had wrapped her since the barn burned. For the first time in days, she sat without urgency. She boiled water, made tea, listened to the sound of herself breathing. But peace, she learned, was never quiet. It echoed. In every creak of the wood, she heard her husband's laugh. In the hiss of the kettle, the voice of Eli Kane whispering of blood and glory. She closed her eyes and let the ghosts come, not to haunt her, but to witness. I did what I had to, she whispered into the dark. I gave warning. I gave mercy. I gave fire. Outside, a twig snapped. Her hand reached for the revolver before her eyes opened, but the figure that emerged was small, barely to her waist. Ben? She said, startled. The boy stood in the doorway, soaked and shivering, eyes wide. They said you'd left, he murmured, that you were gone for good. I was, she said softly, but then you found me. He stepped forward, teeth chattering. They're saying the town's afraid now, that no one knows what law is anymore. Mara wrapped him in a blanket, drew him close to the fire. Good, she said. Let them figure it out without burning women to the ground. Ben looked up. Will you teach me? Teach you what? She asked. How to shoot. No, he said. How to survive without losing yourself. She paused, something soft stirring behind her ribs. Then you came to the right place. And in that moment, Mara knew. Gunslingers don't vanish. They just find smaller hands to teach before the fire dies. Mara stood behind Ben at the edge of the clearing, hands resting lightly on his shoulders, her voice low and steady as the boy raised the rifle toward a bottle perched on an old fence post. Breathe through it, she said. Don't aim with anger. Aim with knowing. The rifle cracked, sharp and clean, and the bottle shattered into dust. Ben lowered the weapon slowly, his eyes wide with surprise. I hit it, Mara nodded, lips curved in the barest smile. That's the easy part. The hard part is knowing when not to pull. They trained through rain, through wind, through silence. She taught him how to track, how to build a fire that wouldn't smoke, how to feel a lie before it was spoken. But what she taught most was this: how to live without apology. At night, he listened to her stories, not the legends the townspeople passed in whispers, but the real ones. How she rode with Eli, how she left, how the land took more than it gave, but always offered a place to stand if you were brave enough to claim it. "Did you ever miss it?" Ben asked one night, staring into the flames. "The blood? The bounty?" Mara shook her head slowly. "I missed being seen, but not what they saw me as." One morning, weeks after they'd settled into the rhythm of something close to peace, a rider came, not with a badge, not with a threat. A girl, barely 20, eyes wary, hands calloused, arrived at the cabin door. "They said this was where women go who don't want to be burned," she said. Mara let her in without a word. By the next week, 3 more followed. By the next month, a dozen. Women with bruised names and wounded hands, outcasts, widows, runaways. And one by one, Mara taught them what she taught Ben: survival, dignity, silence that speaks louder than bullets. They built gardens. They built watchtowers. They built something stronger than any badge: belonging. The towns called it a hideout, a threat. But Mara never called it anything, because this wasn't a place to hide. It was a place to begin again, and in every face that stood beside her, rifle in hand, she saw a version of herself that never got to speak. Until now. They rode in just past dawn, government-leaning, all polished boots and new papers, a judge among them with spectacles too clean for the dust he dared to walk on. 20 men, rifles ready, wagons trailing behind with the promise of order. "By decree of the territorial court," the judge shouted, voice carried by bullhorn and pride, "this land is under unlawful occupation by armed fugitives. You are to disband, disarm, and be taken for processing under civil code." Mara stood at the edge of the clearing with Ben beside her, rifle slung but not drawn, 100 silent eyes behind her. Women not blinking, not flinching. "You brought war to a garden," she said, calm as sunrise. The judge stepped forward, holding the decree like it had weight. "You don't have the right to govern here." "We didn't govern," Mara said. "We survived." The soldiers fanned out, slow and methodical. But the land they stepped on wasn't just dirt. It was watched, measured, marked. The traps had been laid days ago, the creek poisoned for trespassers. The trees whispered warnings. One rifle cracked from the ridge and a soldier's hat flew clean off. No blood, just a message. "We won't fire first," Mara called, "but we won't kneel either." The judge hesitated. He saw now what the papers didn't show: discipline, unity, fury with restraint. "You're harboring fugitives," he tried again. "I'm harboring daughters," she replied. "Sisters, women no one else would claim." "You threaten the order of the state." "Then the state should have ordered better men." Thunder rolled across the distant hills, not weather but warning. The soldiers shifted. One muttered, "We didn't sign up to shoot grandmothers." Another whispered, "This ain't no gang. This is a goddamn tribe." After a long, brittle silence, the judge folded the paper, face pale. "This isn't over." "No," Mara said. "It's just beginning. Somewhere else, far from here." They left by sundown. Not a bullet fired. And when their wagons disappeared beyond the ridge, the hollow came alive again. Not with cheers, but with breath. With planting. With sharpening tools meant to build and, when needed, to defend. Mara stood in the center, Ben beside her, the women spreading out like roots. "They'll be back," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but so will we." And in that moment, the law learned something it hadn't written for. What happens when women name their own justice? Mara walked the ridgeline at dawn, boots steady on the stone, her eyes tracing the land below like a mother counting children. The cabin stood strong. Gardens thrived where ash once lay. Smoke curled from chimneys in soft spirals, not from fire meant to destroy, but from hearths that fed the living. Behind her, the hollow moved with quiet purpose, Ben tending goats, Sarah hauling water, Mira teaching 2 younger girls to aim straight and breathe softer. No commands were shouted, no orders barked. This place ran on shared pain turned into promise. She sat on a boulder that overlooked the trail from the south, the only direction left where threats might come. She lit a thin roll of tobacco and let it hang from her lip, remembering a time when all she had was rage, and all rage had was her. Chayton once said legends weren't born. They were burned into flesh, and she'd lived long enough now to know it was true. Behind her, footsteps crunched, Ben's light, eager step. "Riders passed the western post last night," he said. "Didn't stop, just looked and kept on." "Good," she murmured. "Let them look. Let them know we're still here." He sat beside her, older now, not in age, but in soul. "You ever going to give up the iron?" She looked at her revolver resting beside her, then out over the land. "Not while the memory still smokes." "You could have killed them all," he said. "Those 5, the sheriff, the lawmen." She nodded. "I could have, but then I'd have given them the ending they were begging for. Instead, I made them live with it." "That's colder than death," he said with a half-smile. "No," she said softly. "That's fire with purpose." As the sun crested the ridge, casting golden light over the hollow, voices rose. Laughter, instruction, song. A tribe of outcasts, a village of women who no longer whispered. This wasn't a hideaway. It was the answer to every time someone said, "You don't belong." Mara stood, holstered her gun one last time, and let the wind carry her words. "I was never the villain," she said. "I was the match. And now the world knows what happens when you try to burn a woman who already walks in flame." The legend of Blackthorn was sealed, not in blood, but in root, stone, and fire that would never die.